I like this. I found this on I believe most of you guys are NRCS people. One of your guys' bulletins. There's the key, 1953. There's a lot to be learned here. Mainly that a little bit of religious stuff coming from the government, which would kind of be that's another conference, so we'll get into that later. But
must be a different government.
It could be. But I think Ray touched on it a little bit. We talked about the Dust Bowls. The 1950s were pretty rough in our area also. Here we are now 60 years after this was put out. And you've seen it in the pictures that Ray had of my son. We're still not much further down the road.
We had no clue in 1953.
But
about that state.
That's right. That's right. But I kind of like that, so I'd like to start off with that. I mean, I'm not advocating that God was wrong and only gave us 10, but I like the statement. As Kyle touched on, this is kind of a little bit of information about our farm. Most of you, I assume, know where Lyman is at. We're kind of southeast to southwest of Lyman. There's a little bit of the info on our place. He touched on the crops. This used to say winter wheat. I still have one field of winter wheat this year. I like to think of winter cereals now. We're mainly raising rye and triticale has replaced the wheat in our rotation. Everybody asks why. If you study it up a little bit, I call it a tougher crop. My dad actually raised a lot of it in the 60s. Where the wheat would blow out, they'd go in and plant rye and then harvest it. But the problem with it at the time, he told me, was that all they could get was feed wheat price. We're looking to going into the cover crop market. Everywhere you go and read, everybody's wanting cereal rye for a cover crop. Well, not too many guys in Illinois are going to give up the corn crops to raise a rye crop. So that's the angle I'm kind of working. I don't plant all of these. We haven't planted any canola for a couple of years, and the safflower is just strictly in our cover crop. We have tried raising it as a cash crop. Might look at it again. I had to add different millets in here. We've typically only raised red and white. We tried a little bit of brown top millet. I'd like to raise pearl millet. I think I'm dealing with a seasonal link issue for the pearl millet. The brown top millet definitely has possibilities. I was really impressed with my 2-bag experiment this year. When we switched to continuous crop, Kyle touched on it. It was mainly, I wish I could stand here and tell you it was for a soil health reason. It wasn't. It was money. We needed more acres for the additional family to come back. We just looked at it. In our cash flow, summer fallow was our biggest expense. Why not eliminate it? Kind of what's driving me now. Chemical and fertilizer are our biggest expenses. Why not eliminate it? And it's a pretty easy thing. If we did it once, I think we can do it again. This stands for Prozo millet, in case you're wondering. I assume most of you understood this was winter wheat, corn, sunflowers, millet, and then we were right back to wheat, right behind the millet. As the drought hit in the early 2000s, we kind of went away from the two winter wheat. This was a mindset issue. We had it in our head that we couldn't get the work done. We had to be close to half wheat. That's how we'd always done it. That's what the combines were for. You just couldn't harvest that many acres in the fall. It just wasn't possible. Kind of back to that, the biggest thing that changed your mind. As we did more of the fall crops, we've kind of figured out by having millet, corn, and sunflowers, it wasn't all at one time, so it was pretty easy to get it all done. We're now probably in some kind of rotation like this, where about 1/4 of our acres are in the winter cereals, and then the rest of it's in whatever we decide to plant in each field. And I call it a full flex rotation, because we make decisions on what the rotation is for each field based on what we're trying to accomplish in that field. This is a precipitation record thing that one of my neighbors put together. I don't like to keep track of it because it leads to a lot of drinking, but he does it. I don't really know why. The key to this was another thing we looked at. Even we started continuous crop before 2002, back in the late 90s. We just looked at it, and like most of our moisture is coming from April, especially to August, was where a lot of it was at. I don't know if that number's quite right. Oh, that's the cumulative average. I'm looking for the monthly. There we go. The monthly averages right here. 1.6, see they're all over an inch, which isn't a lot, I understand, most of you guys understand where I'm at. From April to August. If you think about a wheat crop, it doesn't make a lot of sense. We have 2 of the months we have nothing growing in a wheat fallow rotation. And you might even say, well, you can argue that, well, you're going to use it when you plant it, but when you're only saving half of your moisture at best in a fallow rotation, it still doesn't make sense. So we just wanted to try to utilize that moisture right there in them months, and we, instead of save it, we try to use it. That's our theory. I don't know that it always works. But anyway, that's kind of a depressing deal. If we did for some reason, did the math, here's our yearly totals. This year was a little bit better, it's not on here. If you average these against, we figured 90 years of a 14-inch rainfall, it took almost a ½ inch off of our average rainfall. Historical average. Kind of depressing, but more drinking. So my cover crop experience, pretty limited. I'm not a Gate Brown with all these years, we're 2 or 3 years of experience with it. I wouldn't even call it experience, experiments with it. Started after attending a No-Till on the Plains event. I believe Ray Ward was there. I call it based off of some highly sophisticated test plots and observations. By that I mean, whoops, what do we do? 6 months later, like, well, that's kind of neat. We need to try that again. For one, and this is becoming a main driver of it now. And also, it was obvious everything was based off the residue. Now I'm understanding it's based off the residue below the surface also, that we weren't looking at before. This is, Ray touched on this, you can't get worms in sandy soil. I don't know, I might have it in the next picture. These are all worm castings, except for the ant hills, which is something I'm really intrigued by, and I haven't been able to find a lot. I think ants might be as important for us as worms, because they're active in the dry environment. This year in this field, I'm going to have another picture of something here in a little bit, is in this field. This was a couple of years ago. But you can see what we're fighting. This lack of residue. This is a tractor track between the rows of corn. And all that is 2 passes, one with the planter, one with the combine. You can see both duals right there, ran right there. That's how fragile our environment is. 2 passes with a piece of equipment did that. That's how fragile that is. And this was the next spring after corn harvest. This was the next spring I was drilling proso in this field, and then I had to get out and take pictures of my worms. If I had another picture on here to give you an idea of how sandy this is, there was actually yucca plants, probably about right up here. There's yucca plants growing. That gives you an idea of how sandy it is. So worms will absolutely live in sand if you give them the opportunity to. This was a year ago. Now, this is a cover crop. This field we rented in the fall, heavy tillage. All it had ever seen was tillage. Overgrazed. When it wasn't being plowed, it was being grazed. We took it on in the fall, just killed the weeds once, let it go through the winter. We didn't want it blowing. It had nice weed cover on it. We went in, worked it twice to level it out. They'd one weight it the summer before. It was horribly rough. We worked it twice, figured, what are we going to lose? We haven't really done anything with it. Planted this cover crop, we grazed this. Now, most people would look at that and say that isn't the right idea. That's a failure. Okay, this is the same field in February, not quite a year ago. This has cereal rye drilled into it. Now, obviously, everybody knows the wheat story in Colorado this past year. Our rye and wheat wasn't a whole lot different. Pretty rough year for this stuff. However, this is my field down the road that I did not plant a cover crop on. This we fallowed, did the same thing, worked it twice, got it leveled out, then we chem fallowed it. This is what we ended up with in February. This was taken the same day as that previous picture, a ½ mile apart. That cover crop's starting to look like a pretty good deal. And it also allowed me to keep my cows. At that time, that was the only green thing you could see when I grazed that. There was no green in the native pastures. That was the only green thing. So I considered that cover crop a success. Now, financially, was it? I don't know, probably questionable, but it beat, I'm not going to use a bad word, beat this by a bunch. This was a mess. Now, here's the edge of that field that had the cover crop. This was that cover crop over here. This was this spring. We grazed the rye out because the rye was really uneven. We had rye heading out, we had rye coming out of the ground. We just went in there and grazed it again. This is on the edge of the field though. This is north, this direction. This is south. This is a strip of grass that was on the edge. Well, being the GPS guy I am, I just straightened it out and I drilled the rye. Now look at what that rye did. This has grass growing in here. So this has started my next projects of reclaiming my rangeland. That was pretty cool, I thought. And I was actually drilling Prozo, I think, into this rye after we grazed it. When I seen this, I hadn't even seen it. I was in the tractor and I was like, whoa, look at that. I forgot I'd even done it, but look at the difference in that rye versus what we had left out here. And if it would have all been like that, I would have left it in combine. But that actually has like crested wheatgrass and stuff growing in it. This was in February when them other pictures were taken. You can see this is on a headland where it's really bare. That was our biggest issue last winter on the headlands, just where we turned around with the extra traffic. This was some cover crop that was planted after wheat harvest. This is a rapeseed plant. Now you're thinking, what are you looking at there? But it was kind of cool that it was still alive in February. You can see it's green. It was green and alive. This is what we were looking at in here. That's wheat growing. Now you've seen that field there was planted with wheat. You can see how much wheat is growing around back in here, all the way around it. The only wheat that's alive is underneath that rapeseed plant, which goes against everything you're told that it will use too much moisture. The only moisture I had was underneath it. And like I said, it isn't much, but it's the only stuff that was growing on that headland. It was right underneath that plant. This is Brian Burns to give a kudos. Same deal, we were out looking. You can see what we were dealing with again. The wind was blowing our corn stalks and leaves away. Really pouring, like 15 bushel corn crop. All the residue's gone, all the wheat stubble's gone from the wind. It had piled all this residue up again. We're out here in February. Now guys, I drilled the rye in this field the 9th of November, almost a year ago today. When I got out of the tractor, I had the guy that I farm with helping me run the seed out. And I got out of the tractor and I said, well, that was either the biggest mistake we've ever made or one which we've done every acre. Now, this is in February. Again, you're probably thinking, well, what are you looking at? Oh, look at that, underneath them leaves. I know we had got less than a ½ inch of moisture from the 9th of November to when this picture was taken in February. And when I planted that in November, you could not dig the moisture. It was that dry. But just simply having that cover. And again, this is 2 weeks after we picked the corn. It does sometimes, it's not adding up. 1 + 1 isn't equal to 2 anymore. There's something going on. How that even come up, I hadn't even been back to the field, and I drive within a quarter of a mile of it every day. Until Brian come, and Brian said, gotta go look at it. So we drive out there, and I'm like, well, I'm not expecting to see anything. You could row it. Even in that previous picture, you can't see it here, but it was up out here. You just couldn't see it. It was kind of froze back because it was February. It wasn't this green growing stuff. We harvested that field. It only made 10 or 15 bushel of rye. But in our area, most of the summer fallow, conventional and no-till, did not make it. Most of it blew out. You've seen it in Ray's pictures. It was in the background in Ray's pictures. Now how that happens, I can't explain it. I don't really care anymore. I'm going to keep doing it. There's something going on there that I can't explain. It was almost like, especially under them piles, it's almost like it created water. I don't know how it did it, because we had not had more than a ½ inch of water total, with probably a 1/10 of an inch, the biggest event. A couple of little skips of snow is all we'd had. Now, you're thinking, what's he taking a picture of a dirt clod for? This is in that field with the tracks in it. I was walking around, I guess this was this fall. We were planting rye here. So I was waiting for the tractor to show up. So I was out walking around in the field. I was like, look at this dirt clod. And it had pushed this stuff out of the way. It was like the crust had flipped over. And I was like, whoa, what made that? What made that dirt clod? And pushed it up out of the ground. So I grabbed this, and as soon as I grabbed it, I knew it wasn't a dirt clod. I flipped it over. It was some kind of mushroom or something. This is the bottom of it, and these were like little maggots crawling around on it. they were actually moving. I was hoping some of you guys knew what this was, because I just thought it was cool to picture it. But it obviously was some kind of mushroom. There was where it was attached to the ground. But it had like a crust. I mean, we're getting into a pretty detailed picture of soil on it. It literally looked like a dirt clod that had been pushed out of the ground. So I'd take a picture of that. But I'm excited because I think this field's headed to more of the fungal. I mean,
I'm impressed with your soil, by the way.
yeah, pretty sandy stuff, huh? So we'll get into what we're doing. This is supposed to be a cover crop update.
Scott, how long, that field that you were just showing us, that was the conventional field, right? That you just started changing? Or
No, this
no-till?
field is where the picture that I had with the corn stalks and
Right.
the worm castings. We actually took out of CRP in probably like 95 or 6 during the first big sign up of CRP when it all come around. We plowed it out. I mean, we plowed it hard that summer. That was the only thing we knew at that time. I mean, we literally ran tractors over, just finish it, turn around and go over it again. We did that like 3 times. It's probably seen a plow twice since then. That's probably one of our longer term, what I call no-till. When we went continuous crop, we were still doing minimum tillage like once every 5 years. And that was because we thought we had to level it out to harvest pros to get rid of the badger holes. I now call them macro pores.
Yeah.
That makes me feel a little better when I hit one of them. That's my macro pore. So anyway, this is what we're doing now. We planted. This was one of the mixes I planted. I had some seed left over from last year because it was so dry. We did not plant some cover crop after wheat harvest last year. So there's what we planted. I know I'll kind of skip through it pretty quick. We seeded these following pictures, and this picture that's in the background here, you can't really see it, on the 20th of August. I need to be doing this stuff sooner. I just don't get it done.
So you don't have any radish in there, do you?
No, I do have a picture of one that apparently was in the seed or something.
You know, Scott, just going to share something with you. You know what I've noticed about these tillage radish? Under the most severe conditions I've been noticing, they are tough.
Yep.
I've seen them in very extremely acidic conditions. I've seen them in areas compacted, dry, and acidic. I didn't think anything would grow. Those tillage radish were just absolutely tough. So I'm wondering, in the mixes that you are at, where you're located at, is to stick maybe a pound or 2 of tillage radish.
I've talked to Keith and Brian a bunch about that. Our concern is I still feel like I'm in a stage where I'm trying to grow more cover. And I'm afraid if I go to more brassicas, it can work against me just a little bit.
Here's where I'm going with it. I think we need those tillage radish in there because they have these big, huge leaves, and they'll cover that soil for quick cover.
Yep.
And then the other canopy stuff will shade them out. But I'm wondering, because they're so tough, because your conditions are so harsh, we need quick canopy cover, keep that soil moist. And here's the thing that happened in Kansas I want to share with you. It was very interesting. Under the drought conditions, where we had tillage radish and all these mixes together, when you actually walked among that mix, where there was the tillage radish and all that mix, your pants would get wet. They would get wet walking in the mix. So what I'm getting at is the only reason you want the tillage radish in there is that quick leaf, quick cover. They're tough. It's hard to kill them. And I think because you need something very quick to get you a head start, but just a very small component of the mix. And I just wanted to talk because we never had a chance to talk, and that's just my observation.
Well, I do have a picture of one I found actually this morning. So
Yes.
And my argument is that the tillage radish will cause a lot of decomposition of the other grasses.
Yes.
So and he needs all the cover he can
Yeah,
get.
here's where we'll be okay though, Rick. If we have a good high carbon mix, and we're only talking a couple of pounds, you're exactly right, Rick. We don't want to put too much in there to be raised exactly right.
Yeah.
Don't have too much decomposition. But if we're going to, it's going to be, your mix are going to be heavy carbon anyway. So I think you'll be okay.
yeah, because I think on their calculator, their smart mix calculator, I'm getting up like 40 to 1 or something.
Yeah, so I think you'll be okay.
Okay.
All right, so here's the field. this is my test strip. When I first did cover crops 2 years ago, I planted just strips of cover crop. Now I only have 40 feet that isn't cover cropped in the field. I'm going the other way. Ray, that picture Ray showed you of Brandon standing in the triticale, this isn't in that field. But this is the exact same thing. I like this picture because this shows it. This spot, they're bigger than what shows in this picture, has not raised anything for 3 summers in that field. They're bare. Now, if summer follow was the answer, I should be able to raise something there. I haven't raised, I've been storing water in that spot for 3 years. And I still haven't raised anything. That picture there is a perfect example of it. And that, like I said, it's hard to, them spots are all over in that field. It's just, there's something with the soil that's kind of funky that I got behind the curve with the drought.
It's just that spot.
Yeah, they're just small spots. They're like the size of a pickup. And they're just spots, they're hard spots or something. There's something with the soil that's a little funky.
It's a fungus that is hydrophobic, hates water, and so
It's
the water
running
runs
off.
off of it.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
It could be, because we call them hard spots. When we used to farm, they were always hard. Or when I till, I shouldn't say farm, when we used to till, they were always hard. It didn't matter what you did.
Have you measured,
We haven't done
taken
anything.
soil samples in those spots? And
No,
checked where that
because when we
spot was?
went no-till, they kind of went away. But the drought has really brought them back.
And send it to Ray's. Maybe to send it to Ray's lab now, and it'd be good to do the Ray's normal test, the Haney test, and all of them, and see PLFA and see what's going on.
Yeah, and I mean, they're just little spots, but that was a good, this is 180 degrees from where that other picture was taken. This is the neighbors across the road. This is wheat stubble. These pictures are all taken on like the 25th of September, so almost 5 weeks after we planted that cover crop. This is wheat stubble, believe it or not.
It's pretty good cover.
It was. It's not now. We've had a couple of wind events. A lot of these are leaving. But that just, to me, there's our wheat stubble. And it wasn't, or this is actually rye stubble in this picture. It wasn't very good rye. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it was. It wasn't very good. But I would take this over this every day of the week. Because this was kochia that they sprayed when it was about almost waist high. You tell me what they're headed for, and especially in a drought situation. Because these weren't drought stressed, these were maturing when they sprayed them. I mean, we're going to have resistant kochia. I've got to find an answer for all this before these are now on my field. So I've got whatever they created.
You know what helps control Russian thistle?
Cover.
Cereal rye.
Yeah.
I mean, Russian thistle and pigweed hate cereal rye resident.
So there's a down, and kochia. There's a picture more looking straight down into it. I got all kinds of stuff. These sunflowers. I think that's vetch right there. Or flax. Or maybe flax. Anyway, it was all there. It's hard to see it all in these pictures. There's my hat laying down in it. And granted, I should have got it in 3 weeks sooner. I just didn't, guys. I mean, I think that's the key.
What was your cost per acre on that stuff?
Most of our cover crops are pushing $45. But we're,
Seed?
yeah. But the thing for me is it's coming from Bladen. And right now, that's what I'm trying to overcome, is getting more of the seed locally. All the oats in all the pictures are my oats. That cuts down on my shipping cost a bunch, because that's about half the mix, typically bulk-wise. And so but then you got blending issues and stuff, which you about got to have something with the scale.
And the thing is, cover crop seeding has gone up quite a bit.
Yeah, because, and that's the angle I'm working. I'm trying to grow some of these stuff, especially the oats and stuff, locally, and blend more of it locally to cut down on my shipping cost. This is just, I mean, we're able to go out in our fields now, and it isn't like Nebraska, but I'm pretty impressed by the fact I can go out in eastern Colorado, pull up a plant, and I got worms sticking out of the bottom.
And there's the
There's
aggregation.
one there, and there's one right there.
And you got
And all the roots.
Yeah.
I mean, it will work. It's finding a way to make it work. We can't do what they're doing in Nebraska. We can't do what they're doing in Ohio. But there's a method to do something similar. Here's a sunflower I pulled out of that field. There again, we got a worm sticking out of it. You can kind of see there's fungus sticking off of some of these roots down here. And in this field with a shovel we were digging, we were finding worm channels with roots growing right through the center of it, with all the fungus growing off of it. I mean, it's pretty cool stuff. Pretty soon you waste an hour digging. Now this is actually this morning. This is a fresh photo. This was taken this morning, same fields.
Did you put any
Oats.
fertilizer on that, or?
No,
That was taken
Not-
this morning?
this
picture here?
this morning.
So
Yep,
you
I
still
went-
have photosynthesis happening?
Last week, this was a lot greener. Tuesday, a week ago today, tomorrow, was pretty rough on stuff. It finished, pretty much stopped the oats. The oats were still cooking along pretty good. There's my radish. I found one this morning. I didn't order it, I'm sure it was just in the seed. That was this morning. Also noticed a sweatband on that guy's hat. He works hard. There's my sunflowers. They froze off about a month ago, is where they froze off. Now the interesting thing is we have another cover crop test plot in our garden behind the house. And we had, a week ago, I still had sunflowers. Green, growing sunflowers, and safflower. I don't know. It was in corn. It was in a sweet corn patch. We just threw the seed out there. I had a kid from Australia. I took all the seed I could find in the shop, and I said, go throw that in that garden. So he went out there and just broadcast it. Not even drilled, just broadcast. I watered it one time. It started raining in September. It's completely covered. I mean, the stuff's like that tall and still growing. And a week ago, the 1st of November, I still had sunflowers and safflower. All the broadleaves were still going. The frost hadn't even hardly touched it. But it's in a lot of corn residue that's just kind of broke over. So now I need one of them big highboy things to run through my, well, I don't need a real highboy. Something like that tall to run through my corn and spread cover. Here's another picture. This is, I believe, Ethiopian cabbage. Kind of has a stalk on it. Again, last week kind of finished them all off. You can see this. This is sorghum, just sorghum Sudan. It froze off with the sunflowers about a month ago. I think that's got a place in our mixes. I'm going to have to start utilizing that more. And I was talking to Terry earlier.
What was this? Again?
Sorghum Sudan. Just, that's what we call it. It's like, I call it feed, actually, because most guys plant it and bale it. But you can see there's some peas, pea vines growing. I mean, it's still green. I think it's pretty much over with now. Now this is another one of my fungus pictures. I took this one up again when I was drilling rye and triticale. I have no idea what this is. You can see the tip of my plier here. To give you an idea of the scale. I could actually see these spots from the tractor. And for some reason, they were a lot thicker in the black oat stubble than they were the white oat stubble. Right to the line. I have no idea what it is. Maybe I imported something. But it was still kind of, and they were thick. I mean, you could see them at all times out of the tractor cab. I finally had to stop and see what it was.
So they were on, they were on the residue.
Yeah, and well, and even kind of growing on the soil, but mainly up on the residue, and in 2 separate fields. It wasn't one field. I seen it in 2 fields. Now, obviously, right during that time was in September. We all know there were a lot of rain events in Colorado, and we had decent rains, 4 or 5 inches at that point. So I'm sure something, which probably hadn't happened in 80 years in our area, a rain like that in September. But I still thought it was cool. I thought maybe one of you guys would know what that is. So here's some of our lessons. Keith Burns and Green Cover Seeds really advocate this. Have a plan. My plan is more residue above and below the ground. You got to take into, it's going to use some moisture. There's no doubt about it. But everybody always talks about, well, when I terminated the cover crop, it had used this much moisture. The equation don't end then. If you've grown more cover, every drop you get after that, you're going to save more of it. And if your corn becomes, or whatever the next crop is more water efficient, you're going to use less of it. So we got to look at a bigger picture. Soil health, obviously for me, actually putting cover crops in is hard because I'm replacing a cash crop typically. Finding that spot to put it in. Now, last winter I was having a conversation with Odette Menard, which I'm sure most of you have heard, and a guy was sitting across the table and he was in a wheat, corn, sunflowers, proso rotation. And he was telling us, there's no way he could put a cover crop in. He didn't have a fallow period. And we sat there, and finally I asked him, and this was in February, I asked him, so what do you got growing on your corn stalks? Nothing. What do you got growing on your sunflower stalks? Nothing. What do you got growing in your wheat stock? Nothing. And without missing a beat, Odette goes, that's a whole lot of nothing. So, I like telling that story because she beat me to it. I was the one asking the questions. I was trying to drive home the point. Here we are in the winter. I mean, we got to start thinking of that 9-month window that we're froze up or whatever as a fallow period. Now, what is the, again, I don't think we got to have 14-foot tall stuff growing in the winter. But my little rye that was growing underneath them corn leaves was better than nothing. I think. Maybe not. We'll find out. So here's our current state. We're focused on the carbon. We're continuing with cover crop. And here's our one of our new big experiments. And like most experiments, I'm all in. We're composting probably at least 3/4 of our acres this year.
Where'd you get your compost from?
From Humalfa out of Fort Morgan. It's coming 100 miles.
Oh.
Wow.
So
How many tons to the acre you can put?
we're putting 1 ton down.
Okay.
Because that, if all the tests are right stuff, that should almost replace our fertilizer needs and what we've been putting on commercial. And what it is, guys, I'm tired of salt. I mean, this last year was so dry. I was going out into my corn stalks this spring. We stream all of our fertilizer on. I could see every band in them corn stalks from the year before. The ground was white. White soil is bad soil, in my opinion. And if I can see it a year later, that what it did, it killed. I mean, there's no way anything survived in that little band. And I'm tired of cleaning salt out of tanks. I'm tired of the salt on my equipment. And so we just bit the bullet. And cost-wise, I think it's going to be a little bit more expensive than the commercial fertilizer right now, especially with the drop in price.
Have you thought about doing some composting?
Yes, we're working on that.
Good, because I think that would help.
Yes, that right now we're still putting just a little bit of like starter down, and we're trying to use up some fertilizer we had on hand. We just put down a little bit of starter with our rye and triticale this fall. We'll probably do the same thing. We're thinking we're in a transition stage. We're going to have to wean our soil off of that commercial fertilizer, and until we get the system really cranked up and going, we're probably going to continue with a little bit of starter on with the planter or the drill. The other thing we got to get done is this. This is a huge component. If we got it done right, we could possibly eliminate that if we were to get it done right. The key is we're in a super fragile environment. I think you'd have to be really careful with the cattle. You could do more damage than you do good, like I did in one of my first pictures. You got to be really careful. Also working through some issues with that new land. It's a pretty good chunk of land, acres-wise. We're dealing with some issues there. We'll get work through it. And then this is the other thing I'm starting on, and I got some pictures here of it. I like putting this in quotation marks because everybody calls it native rangeland. I don't think it is. We've the ratio of pictures in New Mexico. What we think is native rangeland is absolutely what was not here when whoever was the first guy to walk across there. I'm not going to argue who that was. Whoever the first guy that would walk across there, that's not what was here. There's no way the buffalo herd would have starved to death.
That's true.
I mean, seriously, if there's a herd of 1 million buffalo walking across, the guys at the back ain't going to get a whole lot. Just stop and think about it. And what I've been watching is we had a lot of emergency haying and grazing at CRP. There's some fields that have really nice cool season grasses on them. We're mainly dominated in these native by warm season grasses. They're really nice stands of cool season grasses. They grazed them 2 years out of 3. It's entirely weeds. Them cool season grasses cannot stand up to a grazing of 4 months or 5 months, which is what everybody does. And if you think about it, the first thing to green up is them cool season grasses. You've been feeding hay all winter. What's them cows going to go eat? They're going to eat on until it's gone. Them cool season grasses. And you do that every year, they're going to disappear. I think they're a lot more fragile in our environment than we realize. And so I always put native in quotation marks because I don't think it's native. I think all it is non-farmed rangeland. So here's what I did this year. This tractor is actually out in my pasture. pretty proud of myself. Something that I'm sure most people are wondering, what's he doing again? There's what I put out. Again, not a real diverse mix, but what we're trying to figure out is what will grow out there. And what I'm trying to do is grow tonnage. If I'm going to mob graze it, I need tonnage out there. You can't graze something that's got 300 pounds of grass with 200,000 pounds of animals. That don't equate. You can't do that. So the only other option, and we'll probably head towards it, is bale grazing type of deal where we move them. But we've got to figure out how to get this done. And a lot of our obstacle is water. I mean, we're dealing with big pastures with 1 or 2 water sources. We're going to have to haul water. Logistics, it's just, that's what we got to overcome. It's all up here. It can be done, we just got to get through it. So anyway, this is what I did. This is the grass again. Ray was talking about from an angle, it looks pretty good. As you can see, I think I got dead, so like there's a little dead plant. And this is some of the better in the area.
I was gonna say, that looks really good compared to.
Well, yeah. So here I am going through. This is just my plain old sunflower grain drill. I couldn't believe it actually halfway worked. Now granted, it was pretty wet this fall. The key is we had moisture. I tried to take advantage of it. Again, I should have been in earlier. I should have been in August. This was the middle of September. But it rains, guys. We all know it does. If it rains 3 inches, go out and do something. Don't wait for it to turn into a drought again. Dad says the drought starts as soon as the last rain ended. That's about right. So you've got to be ready to take advantage of it. Here's what it was doing. I mean, you can't even really tell I went through there. Now that isn't real good closure and stuff, but for what I was doing, it worked. And believe it or not, almost all of it has come up. This was taken right as we were drilling. Again, we're back to this is in September. Look at the dead grass I got in here. Now I think eventually it'll fill back in, but I'm trying to jumpstart the process. Now, Ray's gonna like this. You see that first one, Ray?
We were blown away with that
Ray was out in June. It was pretty rough in June yet in our area. And we seen some yellow clover and some CRP that was like that tall.
That's the only thing that was green out there.
Yeah.
It was that yellow
I mean, it was
clover.
pretty impressive. So that's why I stuck that in there for you, Ray.
Beautiful.
Here it is this morning. This was taken this morning. Now the lighting ain't real good, but you can see this is my cereal rye primarily. This is it, and what's neat about this, the rye is bigger and better in the bigger the dead spot in the grass. So if I got a dead spot size of this table, that's where it's really good. And so I'm excited about it because I think if I can just get a little help from Mother Nature, and we've got like 3 foot to 5 foot of moisture in these pastures, sub-moisture with the soil probes.
Have you been grazing these pastures?
They have not been grazed this summer. They're great. These were grazed in the winter. So I'm going to have to, I'm forcing myself to do some fencing because I'm going to have to fence this off. At least fence it off. And then now I've got it fenced off, even if it's just temporarily. I'm getting close to having cells to graze it next summer.
Yeah, you know what the key's gonna be there, Scott? Not to be tempted to take too much.
Yes. The other thing that's going to be tempting, if it looks very good, is to leave it in combine. Just because I think that'd be fun to do once. Plus, if I can grow rye, 3-4 foot tall, I've now got my carbon on the surface to help jumpstart the grass. So but it's a balancing act. I know I got the cattle out there, but yet I know I need the cover. So that's what I'm working through. Here's some more pictures. This is in really good grass. You can see, you just barely see the rye right there. And then this is 10 inches away, so that gives you an idea of the scale. But even in where the grass is really good, it's come up. I mean, it's almost all there.
Any other species?
The clover, the alfalfa, all of it was there. Most of that is froze back.
Yeah.
I don't know that I got it in soon enough to get the alfalfa and the clover established because it's just little bitty stuff and it froze it off. I wish I should have got it in sooner. Bigger. So maybe lesson learned there. There's some more pictures of it. Again, here's a head of grass. So that gives you an idea of the scale, but it's in there. I mean, you got to get out and look for it. Now this is what I was talking about with the dead grass. I don't know if this ain't I got another picture here. I believe that's kochia.
Little tiny rosette kind of.
Yes.
Real fuzzy?
Yes.
Real hairy?
Kind of green.
Now I'm hoping one of you guys can tell me, will that survive the winter?
If I was betting.
It's kochia.
That's what I said. If that's the case, and we get any kind of moisture next spring, our country is going to be covered in kochia. Because the more dead grass you got, the thicker that stuff is. Now, some of it I seen the other day was getting up, it's about that big.
Well, and that's a function of how much your cover will.
That's a function of Mother Nature telling me something.
Yeah, it wants to cover itself.
It wants something on there now. And we all know that kochia is the first thing as a weed that you're gonna get. Now, the other thing I'm worried about is if that gets very big and very thick, like I've seen it in some pastures, next spring, there's gonna be some dead calves laying around. That's gonna get pretty hot on a baby calf come springtime. Nursing on mama, eating 6-inch tall kochia. So we're gonna have to manage that, I'm afraid. So here's a picture, I took pictures into my kids. This is my youngest daughter, Michaela, fishing at our fishing pond. We didn't do a lot of that this summer. If we go, she goes. Here's Cora, we got a senior this year. You gotta make sure you look at the sunflowers. Important. Here's Brandon. Now you guys are noticing a pattern of Brandon. He's in dirty clothes. We do make him bathe occasionally. This is his first buck deer that he got a year ago. He's pretty proud of that. And then here's Becky's the year before. This guy's one of our hunters. Now the key to all them last two pictures, guys, is this is becoming a resource for us. Now we got a little bit of an issue. They disappeared, but I think I might have a mountain lion problem. Because yeah, so that's what somebody else can put on the wall.
I think what I'm hearing from your presentation is most farmers look at their place and they see a problem and they call their agronomist to try to figure out how to get rid of it. And you look at it and see it as an opportunity and try to figure out how to get more of it.
Yep.
And the lions and the deer, and it's all the same thing.
Last year when we went out, this guy that's in this picture come out, he was out black powder hunting antelope, which don't work very good, but that's another story. We went out, this was on Saturday morning, we went out Thursday, and we drove around in what I call the loop and looked at our fields. We seen over 50 deer in our fields. We seen 5 in everybody else's, and we covered probably 30 miles.
There's no food.
You can tell where they're at, what they're wanting, and again, I take that as Mother Nature's telling me something. You can see this isn't very good corn. This hasn't been picked, in case you're wondering. But he was happy, and all his little friends that were with him were happy. So, I take it these guys are telling us something. I mean, and then 20 years ago, we didn't have deer out in the fields. There just wasn't any cover for them. And there wasn't anything to eat through the winter. Now we actually had, that guy, his friend shot one last year. Same afternoon Brandon shot his. It was actually founder. It had hooves on it about that long. Still had all the velvet on its horns.
And the does were founder.
And the does were founder. They're living a pretty good life. And the only reason we know what it was, this guy's a vet.
Oh, right.
I mean, we get an anatomy breakdown, and every time we skin one, we get what's going on, and his buddy that shot the founder's buck was a vet also, and they both were sure that's what it was. So, yeah, so that's what we got going. There's my contacts. I like this. This is a storm comment that I got. Yeah, that's where I got it from. I like that one. I think that's it. Yep.
What's your plan with the cover crop now for next year when you do with that?
The ground that I got to cover crop
Yeah.
now, I'm letting frost kill it. The thing I got going is with all the moisture, we got quite a bit of volunteer wheat in there. We'll probably we're thinking about jumping in there and spraying it, knock that volunteer back, because we all know volunteer don't mix real well with corn. Most of the plan was to go to corn. Obviously that's the plan right now. Plan with cover crops next year is, I was thinking about planting some what I call early spring cover crops. I'm kind of leaning more towards maybe like a late spring cover crop, and a lot of the sorghum Sudan, and that's why I'd have to go late spring because it's not going to stand up to a frost and graze it. The idea being that sorghum Sudan works good in our area. I mean, it grows good. I think I can put oats in with it even then. We've seen some of that with some intercropping that the guy I farmed with tried, and some sunflowers. He had oats like that tall that he planted the end of June, 1st of July.
And that gets started getting pretty warm, doesn't it, Scott, around that time?
Well, the thing we're thinking is we cool down in August, and I mean, we actually planted oats one year on the 4th of July and went late season with them, to where it was actually on the downhill side, and it works. And I'm thinking with this, with a cover with some shade, they might hang in there. That's the idea.
How about a little bit of, what do you think Sunhip would do?
That's been discussed quite a bit.
Because it's a
Yep,
heavy nodulator,
yep.
help feed nitrogen to the system.
Handles heat a little bit.
Cowpeas,
Yep, that's what Keith and I were talking about. I want to have something I can graze. The idea being, what I'm wanting to do is to graze it starting like the middle of August and spread rye or triticale in front of the cows. Let them trample it in and hopefully have it seeded when the cows walk off of it, is the idea.
So how often are you planning on having cover crop on a given field?
I'd like to have it every year because I still have fallow every winter on all them corn stalks and sunflower stalks. 75% of my acres are fallow through the winter, so I'd like to have it every year, but I haven't quite figured out how to do that yet. Otherwise, I'm looking at once every 4 or 5 years probably. You know, if I can find a way to, I don't know that economically we can plant cover crops and just terminate them. Unless we can really grow something that we need, you know, some excellent cover. I think the key for cover crops in our area are going to be the cattle. If we can grow, and that to me is where we grow the tonnage to graze the cows.
Then that way you'd use a cover crop as a fallow year, so to speak?
I'm not really, I want to use it as a way to graze my cows, as a crop. But I think.
I know, but it would be the cover
Yeah.
crop for the whole year.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
in other words, you're still gaining an income because you're grazing it.
yeah.
You can
At
offset the
least
cost of the
recoup
seed.
the expense of the seed, because in our area, with my experience, which everybody here knows, it's been dry the last couple of years. It is if I put cover crop in as a fallow replacement in the spring, I'm taking out a cash crop because I've been raising proso there. And for me, that's the struggle. I'm in a little different situation than most people in my area because I don't have any fallow. And so in order to put cover crop in, I'm having to do it where I had a cash crop. And so that's the struggle I'm dealing with. Now, as our rotation changes, we're also really excited about the black oats, which I didn't touch on. Most people look at you like, what's a black oat?
Oh, and you tried, how did black oats work?
That's all we're planting next year for oats. I mean, it's just, that stubble's just more durable, no doubt about it. They stand up better, I think. I got some planting date issues I gotta work through.
Black oats came from where? What country?
They come out of South America
South
somewhere.
America, that's what I think.
I talked to Admiral Caligari about it last year down in Salina.
But they were selected because they have a long maturity.
Yep, and ours died once this year in the spring. I mean, they went into horrible conditions last spring. They come up, looked pretty decent. They died once. It started raining. They come back. They kind of turned into a mess because they were dying and coming back, and it was kind of a chain reaction. But we harvested most of them. We got a lot of seed, which is nice. So that's going to stop me from having to go get it. But we won't plant any white oats. We're not planning on it, even in the cover crops. We're putting black oats in the cover crops. They get about 4 inches taller than any of the white oats that we found so far. I think the big thing, especially after seeing them in the cover crops this fall, I've got to get them in early. They will handle some cold. Like you just seen them, what they look like this morning. They just finally died last week. Well, there's no reason I shouldn't have them in the ground by the 1st of March.
You can get Keith to give you a bag of Egyptian wheat.
Oh, there you go. And buckwheat is another one. We had a lot of buckwheat in cover crops this year. Looked really good as far as taking it to grain. So I think that's another one we're going to look at trying to raise as a cash crop. Probably interseed it into something that we can harvest it all at one time.
Buckwheat's great for pollinators.
And I know Storm messed with a little bit of it in proso. The nice thing about buckwheat and proso is tame buckwheat is you can separate it from proso. Wild buckwheat you can't separate it from proso. Very good without a color separator, which I don't have and probably won't.
I don't know if I played with it or it played with me, one of the two.
But I think there's possibilities. I have some pictures. We've seen some clover, and just wild clover growing in our Prozo. I think we'll probably interseed some clover next year with some Prozo. I mean, it didn't affect the Prozo at all the way around it. You know it's fixing nitrogen. I mean, when the clover's that tall, it's gotta be doing something right. And especially in our red Prozo, because we lay our red Prozo down in windrows, it would be easy to deal with in the combine because you're gonna swap it down and dry out and go right through the combine. White Prozo might be a little different because I try to run a stripper head through it. I'm not running my stripper head through clover. That might be a little rough on things.
On your compost, does that remove a lot of the salt content?
Yeah. No. I'm excited about it. I mean, I think it's got possibilities.
You know, I've thought about getting a little bit of fish, kelp, maybe some fish, or, you know, Brandon Rocky does a lot of compost.
Yeah, and I've talked to him a bunch about it. You know, a year ago right now, I was actually looking at getting into compost business because I couldn't find it. I thought I had to do it at home, or, you know, I don't have feedlots very close.
Because he's been able to eliminate, and you know how brutal
Yep.
potatoes are.
Yep.
So he's eliminated chemical fertilizer in his operation, it's totally compost teas.
Yep.
The,
And I think that the key for me, the compost tea will replace the starter. Get some of it right down in the seed furrow. You know, give that plant a boost. But we got a lot to learn about that yet. We're baby steps on that project. Because that was a pretty big switch. But I think we've probably got close to 2,500 or 3,000 ton down this fall. So.
Ray, I know we hear some, Mr. Ward, we hear stuff about low salt fertilizer. Is that a misnomer or?
Very much misnomer. It is low chloride fertilizer. We use potassium hydroxide instead of potassium chloride. Otherwise, they're the same nutrients.